The blizzard descended on the Dakota Territory like a living wall of ice and fury, transforming the prairie into a white void where earth and sky became indistinguishable. Maddow had hunted these foothills for most of his 28 winters, but even he knew better than to test a storm like this. The elk tracks he had been following for 3 hours disappeared beneath fresh drifts, and the wind drove snow into his face hard enough to sting exposed skin. He turned toward shelter, favoring his twisted right foot as he always did, each step deliberate and measured. The club foot he had been born with made speed impossible, but it had taught him patience and the importance of choosing every footfall with care. Where other men could run from danger, Maddow had learned to avoid it entirely through careful observation and planning. It had kept him alive this long. The abandoned barn he sometimes used stood perhaps a quarter-mile distant, its dark shape barely visible through the horizontal sheets of snow. He pulled his wool blanket tighter around his buckskin shirt and started toward it, his breath freezing in his mustache. The temperature had dropped well below zero, and anyone caught out here without shelter would be dead before morning. A sound cut through the howling wind. Faint, almost swallowed entirely, but distinctly human. Maddow stopped his body going still in that way hunters learned when listening for prey. There. Again. A weak cry, directionless in the storm, but unmistakable. Someone was out here dying. He changed course immediately, moving toward the sound with as much speed as his uneven gait allowed. His club foot dragged slightly through the deep snow, but his endurance was iron-forged from years of compensation. He was no warrior, could never run fast enough for buffalo hunts or raids. But he could track through conditions that would defeat most men, and he could walk all day without stopping. The dark shape resolved itself slowly through the white chaos. A body half buried, already lying near the collapsed remains of a fence. Female, he noted, as he dropped to his knees beside her, his heart hammering. Young, maybe early 20s, dressed in a wool dress torn at the shoulder and heavy boots caked with ice. Her hair had come loose from its pins and spread across the snow like spilled ink. Maddow stripped off his mittens with shaking fingers and pressed them against her neck, searching desperately for a pulse. The wind tore at him, threatening to bury them both. For 3 long heartbeats, he felt nothing. Then there. Weak and slow as melting ice, but present. She was alive. Her hands were frozen into claws, the fingers blue-white with cold. He rubbed them briskly between his palms, trying to force warmth back into the flesh before frostbite could claim them entirely. Her eyelids fluttered, but did not open. He looked around desperately. The barn was perhaps 200 yards away, barely visible as a darker shadow against the white storm. It was not much, but it would have to be enough. He unwrapped the blanket from his shoulders and tucked it around her body, then worked his arms beneath her knees and back. She was lighter than he expected, her body limp and cold as winter earth. As he lifted her, her head lolled sideways and came to rest against his collarbone, settling into the hollow of his shoulder. He adjusted his grip instinctively, pulling her tighter against his chest to stabilize her and share what little warmth his body still held. The walk to the barn was the longest of his life. Each step through knee-deep snow required concentration and balance, his club foot made precarious. The wind pushed against them like an enemy trying to drive them down. Maddow kept his face low, his scarred cheek pressed near her mouth so he could feel the faint, irregular warmth of her breathing. "Stay," he whispered, though she could not hear. "Stay with me." Her breath was so weak he had to stop 3 times to make sure she was still alive. Each time he felt a strange tightening in his chest when he confirmed the whisper of air against his cold skin. This was duty the Lakota way taught, that life was sacred, that those with strength protected the weak. But something about the way her unconscious body trusted itself to his arms, the vulnerability of her complete dependence, made him hold her more carefully, than he had held anything in years. The barn door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Matto kicked it open with his good foot and stumbled inside, gasping with relief as the wind's assault suddenly ceased. The structure was falling apart. Warped boards let in thin streams of snow, and the roof sagged dangerously on the north side. But the south wall was solid enough, and there was old straw scattered across the dirt floor. He laid her down as gently as he could on a relatively clean patch of straw, then immediately set about building a fire. His hands were clumsy with cold as he gathered wood chips from a broken crate and coal scraps left by previous occupants. He arranged them carefully using dry grass he kept wrapped in oilcloth to catch the sparks from his flint and steel. The first 3 attempts failed, the sparks dying before they could catch. The fourth produced a weak flame that he coaxed with steady breath into a small, smokeless fire. While the fire grew, he returned to the woman and began a systematic check for injuries. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and down one side the fabric stiff with frozen mud and what might have been blood. Her hands were scraped raw across the knuckles, as if she had been crawling or fighting. Her left wrist was badly swollen, the joint already turning purple. He found no bleeding wounds, but the hypothermia was severe and immediate. He melted snow in his battered tin kettle over the fire, and then used a relatively clean rag from his pack to gently wipe the dirt and dried blood from her face. Up close, he could see she had strong features, a straight nose, high cheekbones, and a determined set to her jaw even in unconsciousness. Her dress, though torn and filthy, was well made with careful stitching. Not a destitute woman, then. A surveyor's assistant, perhaps, or a merchant's daughter. Her wrist needed attention. Matto found 2 straight pine sticks in the corner and used twine salvaged from discarded harness straps to bind them carefully around her forearm, immobilizing the swollen joint. He worked with the practiced efficiency learned from years of treating injuries, far from any doctor, his fingers gentle despite their roughness. As he worked, she stirred. Her eyes opened briefly dark brown, unfocused with pain and confusion, and she mumbled something in a language he did not recognize. Russian, maybe? The gold rush had drawn people from across the world. Then she switched to broken English, her voice barely audible. Ground eating the town. Her hand moved weakly to her chest, clutching at something hidden beneath the torn fabric of her bodice. Must protect. Cannot let him. You are safe, Matto said, keeping his voice low and steady, as he would with a frightened animal. Rest now. You are safe. But her shivering intensified, her teeth chattering so violently he could hear them clicking together. The fire was growing, but still too small to counter the brutal cold seeping through the barn's walls. Matto knew from experience that severe hypothermia required more than distant warmth. On the frontier, where death was always 3 bad decisions away, survival meant setting aside the niceties of civilization. He positioned himself with his back against the solid south wall and carefully drew her into the space between his legs so her back rested against his chest. He wrapped his blanket around both of them, creating a cocoon of shared warmth. His left hand settled carefully on her sternum, feeling the slow, irregular beat of her heart through the wool of her dress. Monitoring, making sure she kept breathing. They sat like that as the fire crackled and the storm raged beyond the walls. Gradually, so slowly, he almost did not notice her breathing steadied and deepened. It began to sink unconsciously, with his own inhale, exhale, their bodies finding a shared rhythm in the darkness. The violent trembling eased to occasional shivers. Matto kept his hand on her chest, feeling her heartbeat grow stronger and more regular, while his other arm held the blanket closed around them. This was not romance. This was survival. But somewhere in the darkness of that storm-battered barn, with a stranger's life literally in his hands, Matto felt something shift inside himself. A protectiveness that went beyond duty. A connection forged in necessity, but rooted in something he could not quite name. Hours passed in near silence. The fire burned low, and he fed it carefully with scraps of wood, never moving enough to disturb the woman resting against him. She mumbled in her sleep, sometimes fragments in Russian, fragments in English. Once she whispered, "Papa, no," with such raw distress that Mato's hand tightened involuntarily on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort he did not consciously choose to make. Near dawn, as the storm finally began to weaken and gray light seeped through the gaps in the boards, she woke more fully. Her body went rigid, every muscle tensing. She tried to pull away. Mato immediately released her and withdrew his hand from her chest, giving her space, keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. She twisted awkwardly to look at him, her dark eyes wide with alarm and confusion. He saw her take in his face, the old fever scars that marked his cheeks from a childhood illness, the dark eyes at the straight black hair tied back with a leather cord. She looked at his clothing, the mix of buckskin pants and wool shirt that marked him as Lakota, adapting to the white man's world. Her gaze dropped to his club foot, visible now in the dim light, then back to his face. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, and Mato waited for the fear or disgust he had seen so many times in white faces. But what he saw instead was calculation. She was assessing the situation, weighing her options, deciding whether he was a threat. Finally, she nodded once, a single decisive movement that said she understood and accepted his help. "Thank you," she whispered, her accent, strange Russian vowels shaped around English words learned in America. "My name is Bessie Volkov." "I am called Mato," he replied. In English, it means bear. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile despite her obvious pain and exhaustion. Then her hand moved again to her chest, checking for something. He saw profound relief cross her face when she found it still there, a small, rectangular shape hidden beneath her bodice. A book, perhaps, or papers. "What happened to you?" Mato asked, keeping his tone neutral and his body language unthreatening. Bessie's face closed like a door slamming shut. She looked toward the barn entrance, where gray dawn light was beginning to filter through the gaps more strongly as the storm finally broke. Fear flickered across her features. "Men came," she said finally, her voice flat, reciting facts to keep emotion at bay. "To the survey camp where I was working. They burned everything. The tents, the equipment, all of it. They tried to—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "They tried to kill me. I ran. Fell in the snow. Could not get up again." "Why?" Mato asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Violence on the frontier always came down to moneyland or revenge. She met his eyes directly. "Because I know the truth about what is happening in Rattler's End, and my father cannot let that truth be spoken." Before Mato could ask what she meant, they both heard it. The sound of horses crunching through snow, voices shouting growing louder, men approaching the barn with purpose. Bessie's hand shot out and gripped Mato's wrist with surprising strength for someone who had nearly died hours earlier. Her dark eyes were desperate, pleading. "Do not let them take me," she whispered urgently. "Please, they will kill me. Will—" "I know they will." Mato looked toward the barn door, his mind racing through options and finding few good ones. The voices were getting closer, at least 3 men, maybe more. His percussion revolver was wrapped in oilcloth in his pack, the powder dry, but it held only 6 rounds and required careful loading between each chamber. Against multiple armed men, his chances were poor. But the terror in Bessie's face was real and immediate, and Mato had never been the kind of man who abandoned someone in need. He stood carefully, favoring his club foot, and reached for his pack. "Stay quiet. Hide in the straw and do not make a sound." Bessie shook her head, pushing herself up on her good hand, despite the obvious pain the movement caused. "You do not understand. One of them is my father. Matto paused his hand on the wrapped revolver. Your father wants you dead. Not dead, silenced. She pressed her free hand to her chest again, where the hidden object rested. I have something he desperately needs. Evidence of what he has done. Evidence of what murder. The word came out flat and heavy. He has been causing the mine collapses around Rattler's End, sabotaging the shafts to drive down land prices, buying the claims for nothing, then selling them to people who do not know the ground is hollow and unstable. 7 miners have died in the collapses he engineered, and I can prove it. Her voice cracked slightly. I did not know until 2 days ago. I found his records, his plans, everything. He has been using my survey work to identify which shafts to collapse. And when I confronted him, she stopped, her face going pale at the memory. Matto understood immediately. The Black Hills gold rush had peaked years ago, but the aftermath was still drawing vultures who saw opportunity in the chaos left behind. Land speculation was a dangerous game out here where law enforcement was thin, and justice often came at the end of a rope rather than from a judge's bench. Show me, Matto said quietly. Bessie hesitated only a moment, then reached into her bodice and pulled out a small leather journal, its cover stained with snow and blood. She opened it with shaking fingers to reveal pages covered in neat handwriting, detailed survey maps and columns of numbers. Matto could not read English well, but he recognized maps when he saw them. Bessie's finger traced lines across one page showing him a network of tunnels beneath what he assumed was Rattler's End, marked with red ink. 7 locations bore large X marks. Beside each X was a date and a series of numbers. My father keeps meticulous records, Bessie said bitterly. Even his crimes. These are the dates miners died, and here purchase orders for excessive blasting powder. And here deeds signed over to him by desperate widows. And here sales records showing he sold the same land to new buyers at full price, never telling them the ground was ready to collapse. The voices outside grew suddenly louder. A man shouted, "Check the barn!" Bessie quickly tucked the journal back into its hiding place. That book is the only proof. Without it, he is just a businessman. With it, he hangs. Matto moved to the barn door and peered through a crack. 3 men on horseback approached through the snow. The leader was a big man in his 50s, his beard thick and graying, wearing a heavy buffalo coat and carrying a Spencer repeating rifle. Beside him rode 2 younger men, one thin and nervous, with a scar running from temple to jaw, the other quiet and watchful. That is my father, Bessie whispered behind him. Mikhail Volkov. The thin one is Snipe Kelly. The other is Dutch Merrick. They burned the camp. They were going to bury me in the ashes. Matto unwrapped his revolver and checked each chamber. 6 shots. He would have to make each one count. The riders stopped 30 feet from the barn. Mikhail dismounted carefully. Bessie, he called, his Russian accent thick. I know you are in there. Come out. You are hurt and cold. Let me help you. Matto felt Bessie stiffen beside him. He held up a hand to stop her from speaking. Come out now. Mikhail continued, his tone hardening. You have something that belongs to me. Give it back and we can forget this foolishness. Bessie leaned close to Matto's ear. He will kill you if I go out there. He will kill us both. Matto believed her. The question was how to survive long enough to get Bessie and her evidence to someone who could act on it. Who is with you, Bessie? Mikhail's voice had lost all pretense of concern. Some drifters send him out. This is family business. Snipe Kelly was circling toward the barn's left side. Dutch Merrick stayed mounted patient as a cat watching a mouse hole. Motto barred the door with a heavy beam and moved to a gap in the south wall where he could see without being easily targeted. "Bessie cannot come out," he called. "She is too weak. Bring a doctor if you want to help her." Silence. Then Mikhail. "Who are you?" "No one important." "Then this is not your business." "She made it my business when she nearly died on land I was hunting. I will not give her over to men who mean her harm." Mikhail laughed harshly. "You think you can stop us? There are 3 of us and 1 of you. And you are Lakota, yes. The settlers in Rattler's End will not care if we kill you. They will say you tried to kidnap a white woman." It was a credible threat. But Motto had not survived 28 years by giving up when odds turned against him. "Then you will have to kill me," he said flatly. "And I will make that expensive." Snipe had reached the barn's corner, his rifle swinging nervously. Motto tracked him through the gaps. "Last chance," Mikhail called. "Send her out." Motto did not reply. Beside him, Bessie was breathing hard, her splinted wrist held against her chest. "Are you well enough to move if we must run?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I will manage." The first shot shattered the silence. Snipe fired prematurely, the bullet tearing through the door and burying itself in the beam. Splinters flew. Bessie flinched but made no sound. "Blast it, Snipe!" Mikhail roared. "I said wait." But the standoff had become a siege. Motto moved fast, pulling Bessie down behind an old plow. He returned fire through the gap, his shot clipping Snipe's hat brim and forcing the thin man to dive for cover. "Stay low," Motto said. "Do not raise your head unless I tell you." She nodded, her eyes fixed on him with trust and terror mingled. Outside, Mikhail was shouting orders. "Dutch, cover the front. Snipe, find the back entrance. We wait him out. He has no food, no water. By nightfall, he will be desperate." Motto counted his remaining shots. 5. He had powder and balls in his pack, but reloading during a fight was nearly impossible. He assessed their situation. The barn was perhaps 40 feet long and 20 wide, with a rotting hayloft above. The main door faced east. A smaller rear door on the west side was buried in snow. 2 small windows on the north wall, too small for escape. The warped boards would let in killing cold once night fell. Their supplies were desperately limited. Motto's pack contained powder balls, caps, flint, and steel, his knife 2 days' worth of dried meat, and 1 blanket. Bessie had nothing except torn clothes and the journal. "How long can we last?" Bessie asked. "Depends on how patient your father is," Motto replied, watching the gaps. "And how badly he wants that book. He will burn us out. He has done it before." Motto glanced at her sharply. "The camp?" She nodded. "I woke to flames and men shouting. I grabbed the journal from his tent and ran. I heard him screaming at them to find me, to make sure I could not tell anyone." Her voice dropped. "I thought he loved me. Even if he had done terrible things, I thought I could talk to him. But when I showed him, I knew." She shook her head. "He looked at me like I was already dead." Motto understood that look. He had seen it before, the look that said, "You are not a person, just an obstacle." "We need to reach Rattler's End," he said. "There are people there who might help. Dr. Pike is honest, I think." "The sheriff is on my father's payroll," Bessie interrupted bitterly. "Kane, I saw the payment records." That complicated matters, but Motto knew others who might be sympathetic. Dr. Edwin Pike, who had come west after his wife died, seeking purpose in frontier medicine. Alma Finch, the schoolteacher, sharp-minded and fearless. Owen Daly, the widower farmer, who had nearly lost his property to speculators. "Then we go around the sheriff," Motto said. "But first we survive." A sound from the rear made him turn. The back door was being forced open. He pressed his knife into Bessie's good hand. "If anyone gets through, use it. Aim for the stomach or throat. Do not hesitate." "I have never—" "Hesitation gets you killed," Maddow said flatly. She nodded, gripping the knife. Maddow moved to the back door with a pitchfork. The door burst open. Snipe stumbled through, rifle raised. Maddow drove the pitchfork into Snipe's thigh. The thin man screamed and fell back, his rifle discharging into the rafters and bringing down snow. Maddow slammed the door and barricaded it. From the front, Dutch was putting his shoulder to the main door, trying to break through. The wood groaned. Bessie moved without being asked, dragging a heavy crate to reinforce the door. When Dutch's shoulder appeared through a crack, Maddow whipped a chain forward. The heavy links struck Dutch's face. Blood sprayed. He roared and jerked back. Bessie wedged more timber into the gap. She was breathing hard, but there was fierce satisfaction in her eyes when she met Maddow's gaze. "Thank you," he said simply. "You saved my life," she replied. "Now we are even." It was partnership forged in necessity. But Maddow felt that pull again, that connection beyond simple survival. Outside, the attack ceased. Maddow could hear Mikhail berating his wounded men. "Incompetent fools, you cannot handle one crippled Indian and a girl." "He stuck me good, boss," Snipe whined. "I am bleeding bad." "Then bind it. Dutch, you are supposed to be a professional." "That chain opened my head to the bone," Dutch said coldly. "I am done rushing them. We wait. Let the cold do the work." Pause. Then Mikhail, "Fine. We wait. But if she tries to run, shoot her in the legs. The book is worth more than her comfort." Bessie flinched. Maddow saw her fingers tighten on his knife until knuckles went white. "He truly means it," she whispered. "I know." Maddow checked his revolver. 5 shots left. The temperature dropped as the sun climbed a paradox of winter on the plains. The wind found every gap, stealing their warmth. Maddow built up the fire, but wood was scarce. By nightfall, they would be dangerously cold again. He looked at Bessie and saw the tremor beginning in her hands and the paleness returning to her lips. She needed proper shelter, not a siege in a disintegrating barn. "Tell me about the journal," he said, partly to distract her, partly because he needed to understand what they were protecting. Bessie sank against the crate, cradling her wrist. She pulled the journal out again. "My father hired me to survey land 3 months ago. I thought it was legitimate work. But I began noticing discrepancies between my reports and what he told buyers." She opened to a page with neat columns. "Here, shaft 3. My assay said the silver vein was exhausted. But my father told the buyer there was still ore worth extracting. He sold that claim for $800. 2 weeks later, it collapsed, killing 2 miners. But look, here is an invoice for 40 pounds of blasting powder purchased 3 days before the collapse, for a mine supposedly not being worked." She turned pages. Shaft 7. Same pattern. Exhausted vein, false report, powder purchase, collapse. 3 men died. Maddow studied the careful notations. "You documented everything." "I was trained as a surveyor. I measure, I document, I verify." Her voice cracked. "I just never imagined I was documenting my father's murders." "Why did he let you see his ledger?" "He did not. I found it 2 days ago in his tent. He was supposed to be in town, but came back early. I was reading it when he found me. I have never seen him so angry." Her voice dropped. "He did not even try to explain. He just called for Dutch and Snipe and told them to take care of the problem. That is what he called me, the problem." Maddow sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Then we make sure he does not get what he wants." Bessie looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "Why are you doing this? You could have left me." You owe me nothing. Maddo considered carefully. Because you would have done the same, I think. She surprised him by laughing a short, sharp sound. You give me too much credit. Before yesterday, I would have surveyed past where you fell and never looked back. But not today. No, not today. You changed that. Their eyes held longer than necessary. Then Bessie looked away, color rising in her cheeks. Outside, the waiting game continued as afternoon wore into evening. The temperature plummeted. Their fire died when the last wood was consumed. The barn was barely warmer than outside. Bessie's trembling returned worse than before. Her lips took on a blue tinge. Maddo recognized the signs of returning hypothermia. If they stayed through another night, she would not survive. We cannot stay, he said. Can you run? I will try. Trying will get you killed. Then I will run, she said firmly. Rattler's End is 1/2 mile through snow. If we move quietly, if the moon stays hidden, we might make it before they realize we are gone. And if they realize, then we run faster. It was a terrible plan, but their only option. Maddo gathered his supplies, checked his revolver 5 shots, and helped Bessie to her feet. She swayed but steadied herself. They moved to the back door. Maddo worked the barricade free inch by inch. Bessie stood ready with his knife. Finally, the door was clear. Maddo cracked it open. The night was black, the moon hidden behind clouds. He saw no one. Stay close, he whispered. Step where I step. If I drop, you drop. Understand? I understand. They slipped into the frozen night. The snow was deep coming up to mid-calf, and every step burned energy. Maddo led, choosing a path using natural cover, collapsed fence scrub brush, shallow depression. Bessie followed, placing her boots in his prints. They had made perhaps 100 yards when shouts erupted from the barn. Someone had discovered their escape. Run, Maddo said. They abandoned stealth for speed. Bessie ran with surprising grace, despite her splint lifting her knees high, her breath clouding white. Maddo pushed his club foot hard, ignoring the grinding pain. Behind them, horses. The creek, he gasped, pointing to a frozen streambed ahead. Get down in it. They half ran, half slid down the bank. The frozen creek offered a shallow channel, and they ran along it, protected by the banks. Above, horses thundered past. But the ice was treacherous. Bessie stepped wrong, and her foot punched through with a crack. She fell hard, her leg plunging into freezing water up to the knee. Maddo grabbed her belt and hauled backwards, spreading their weight. Bessie's leg came free with a sucking sound, her boots soaked and already freezing. They scrambled to the far bank just as Snipe appeared on the opposite side, rifle raised. Found them, Snipe shouted. Maddo shoved Bessie behind a haystack and fired twice. Both shots went wide in the darkness, but forced Snipe to duck. 3 shots left. They ran again, Bessie limping from her soaked boot. Rattler's End was visible ahead, a cluster of dark shapes with lamplight glowing in a few windows. Dutch Merrick cut them off his horse, blocking their path. He had a pistol leveled at Maddo's chest. End of the line, Dutch said. Then Owen Daly's voice cut through the night. Drop it, Merrick. The farmer appeared from behind his barn rifle, pointed at Dutch. Behind him, his 2 teenage sons emerged with pitchforks, 3 against 1. Dutch hesitated, calculating, then lowered his pistol. This is not over, he said, wheeling his horse and disappearing. Owen approached carefully. Inside. Both of you. Now. They did not argue. Owen's barn was warm with animal heat. His sons brought blankets while Owen pulled off Bessie's soaked boot and rubbed circulation back into her foot. Blast it, girl, Owen muttered. Another 10 minutes, and you would lose toes. What are you running from? Her father, Maddo said. Mikhail Volkov. He is trying to kill her. Owen looked up sharply. Volkov is your father. That man tried to buy my farm 3 years back for half its worth. When I refused, someone burned my hay shed. Never could prove it was him, but I knew. He is worse than you think, Maddow said. He looked at Bessie. Show him. Bessie pulled the journal out and passed it to Owen. The farmer opened it, his sons reading over his shoulders. Maddow watched their faces change as they absorbed the meaning. Bloody hell, Owen breathed. He murdered them, all those miners, for money. And he will continue if that evidence does not reach the circuit judge, Maddow said. We need to get to Deadwood. But Deadwood is 50 miles through mountain passes, and Volkov has men and money, Owen said grimly. You need allies. People who want him stopped. He thought. Dr. Pike lost a patient 3 months back, young miner who died in a collapse. Pike has been carrying that guilt, and Alma Finch has been trying to get investigations for over a year, but Kane keeps blocking her. There are families who lost men and never got answers. Can we trust them? Bessie asked. With this, Owen touched the journal. Yes, they want justice. They just never had proof before. They moved cautiously through the dark streets to Dr. Edwin Pike's office. Pike was a thin man in his 60s, with white hair and steady hands. He took one look at Bessie and immediately began treatment, setting up a cot near his stove and bringing heated stones wrapped in cloth. While Pike worked, more people arrived. Alma Finch, sharp-eyed and angry as she listened to their story. Several miners and their wives drawn by news that someone finally had evidence against Volkov. Maddow stood somewhat apart, aware he was the only Lakota in the room. He watched how eyes slid over him with discomfort. But when Bessie explained how he had saved her life, fought to protect her, attitudes shifted slightly. Not to acceptance, but to grudging respect. Dr. Pike examined Maddow's bruised throat where Dutch had throttled him. Lucky he did not crush the windpipe. You will be hoarse for days. He applied a salve that smelled of mint. Pike glanced at Bessie, then back at Maddow. The doctor's eyes were knowing. She is brave. You chose well to protect her. I did not choose, Maddow said. I found her dying. The rest followed. That is what we tell ourselves, Pike said quietly. But I think there is more to it. Maddow did not reply, but his gaze was drawn to Bessie. She was speaking with Alma, gesturing at the journal pages spread across Pike's table. Despite exhaustion and pain, she was still fighting. Their eyes met across the room. Bessie paused mid-sentence and smiled a private smile for him alone. Maddow felt his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with his injured throat. You should rest, he said, crossing to her. I will rest when this is over, Bessie replied, but she swayed. Maddow's hand shot out to steady her elbow. His fingers wrapped around her arm, and she leaned into the support without hesitation. They stood closer than necessary, the room fading around them. Thank you, Bessie said softly, for everything. I know you could have walked away. So could you, Maddow replied. You fought beside me. That matters. We make a good team. Yes, we do. Alma cleared her throat pointedly. If you two are done, we have a problem to solve. Bessie flushed and pulled away, but not before her fingers squeezed his arm gently. The group gathered around the table, studying the journal and planning. The circuit judge would arrive in Deadwood in 2 days. If they could reach him with evidence, McHale could be arrested and the fraudulent sales invalidated. But the journey was dangerous. We could ask Sheriff Kane for help, one miner suggested. Kane is bought, Alma said flatly. Volkov has been paying him. I saw them meeting money changing hands. Then we cannot involve Kane, Owen said. We go straight to Deadwood. Volkov will intercept us on the road, another miner pointed out. There is only one good route through the passes this time of year. He can ambush us. They argued strategies, weighing risks. Maddo listened, but his attention kept drifting to Bessie. She had grown pale again. Dr. Pike noticed too and began herding people out. Enough for tonight. The girl needs rest. As the room cleared, Maddo moved to leave, but Bessie's voice stopped him. Stay, please. I do not want to be alone. He turned back. She was lying on the cot, now covered with blankets, but her eyes were open and fixed on him. Maddo nodded and pulled a chair close. He sat revolver on his lap and prepared to keep watch. But Bessie's hand emerged from the blankets, reaching toward him. Without thinking, Maddo took her hand. Her fingers were warm now, no longer frozen. They curled around his, holding tight. Dr. Pike returned to check Bessie's wrist. He unwrapped Maddo's makeshift splint and nodded approval. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. The bones are aligned. He applied a better splint and gave Bessie laudanum for pain. Within minutes, her eyes grew heavy. But even as sleep claimed her, she did not release Maddo's hand. He sat there through the night, watching her breathe, feeling the steady pulse in her wrist, and wondering how his life had changed so completely in less than 2 days. Morning brought chaos. The sound of breaking glass shattered the quiet. A rock the size of a fist crashed through Pike's window wrapped in paper. Sheriff Hollis Kane stepped through the door without knocking his hand on his pistol. He was heavy-set in his 50s with a drooping mustache and calculating eyes. Morning, Doc, Kane said with false friendliness. Heard you have some folks here who need my help. Dr. Pike positioned himself between Kane and the back room. Just travelers caught in the storm. Nothing that concerns you. Now that is not what I heard. Kane's eyes flicked to Maddo, then to Bessie, who had appeared in the doorway fully dressed despite her injuries. Heard Volkov's daughter ran off with valuable property. Heard she might be here with a Lakota fellow who kidnapped her. That is a lie, Bessie said clearly. No one kidnapped me. I fled because my father tried to murder me. Kane's expression did not change. That is a serious accusation, Miss Volkov. And I have serious proof. Bessie held up the journal. My father has been sabotaging mine shafts and selling worthless land. 7 men have died. It is all documented powder purchases, land deeds, collapse dates. Everything. For a moment, genuine interest flickered in Kane's eyes. He stepped forward. Let me see that. Bessie pulled the journal back. Why, so you can take it to my father. I know he has been paying you. Your name is in here too, every bribe, every time you looked away. Page 47. Payments to H. Kane totaling nearly $300. Kane's friendly mask cracked. You do not know what you are talking about, girl. Page 47. Bessie repeated coldly. Dates matching collapse investigations you closed without looking at evidence. The room went quiet. Kane's hand tightened on his pistol. Here is the thing about evidence, he said, voice losing all friendliness. It is only valuable if it reaches someone who cares, and I am the law in Rattler's End. He drew his pistol, pointing it at Dr. Pike. Hand over the book, now. Maddo stood smoothly, his revolver appearing. No. Kane swung toward Maddo. You threatening a lawman Indian? Just protecting an innocent woman from a corrupt man. They faced each other, both armed, both ready. But Kane had the advantage of a badge. If he killed Maddo, it would be ruled justifiable. Bessie stepped between them, journal clutched to her chest. Shoot me if you want it. That is the only way. Kane's eyes narrowed. Your father wants you alive. but he never said unharmed. He lunged forward and grabbed her arm, twisting her splinted wrist. She cried out. The journal started to fall. Maddow fired. The shot struck the floor inches from Kane's boot. Kane released Bessie and jumped back. Dr. Pike swung his medical bag like a club, striking Kane's gun hand. Bone cracked. The pistol discharged into the ceiling. Owen Daly burst through the door rifle, leveled his sons behind him. Enough. Kane looked around, suddenly outnumbered. His face flushed red with rage. You people are making a mistake, he said. Volkov owns half this territory. Watch us, Alma Finch said from the doorway, where she had appeared with 3 miners' widows, all carrying pistols. In that moment of chaos, the back door burst open. Snipe Kelly, whom Owen had been holding prisoner in a nearby shed, appeared, his hands still bound with rope, but moving with desperate speed. He had somehow worked the ropes loose enough to slip free during the commotion. His eyes were wild, darting between the journal and the door. Snipe was not there to apologize or redeem himself. He was there because he saw opportunity in chaos, a chance to escape, and if he could grab the journal, a chance to bargain his way back into Volkov's good graces and get paid. The thin man had always been motivated by survival and profit, nothing more. He lunged for the journal where it had fallen during the struggle, snatching it up with bound hands before anyone could react. Stop him! Bessie screamed. Maddow ran after Snipe, but his club foot made him slower than he needed to be. He burst out of Pike's office to see Snipe running, limping with his wounded leg, but driven by fear toward the old ore trestle spanning a gully on the edge of town. Owen and his sons poured out behind Maddow. Snipe was already reaching the trestle, already beginning to climb the wooden framework like a ladder, using crossbeams for handholds. The journal was tucked inside his coat. He is climbing, Owen's son shouted. Bessie appeared beside Maddow. I can climb after him. With one hand, Maddow looked at her splinted wrist. Better one hand than none. I surveyed this trestle. I know which parts are stable. You cannot climb it with your foot. She was right. Maddow's club foot made climbing nearly impossible. Then I go underneath, cut him off on the far side. Owen and his sons boosted Bessie onto the lower framework. She began climbing one-handed, using her legs to push upward, her splinted arm held close for balance. It was slow and clearly painful, but she climbed steadily. Above her, Snipe saw her coming and climbed faster, moving to the top, where the main support beam crossed 50 feet above the gully. The beam was only 8 inches wide, but Snipe walked it, heading toward the far side. Maddow ran beneath the trestle, positioning himself on the opposite side. 2 shots left. Then the ground shuddered. It was subtle at first, just a vibration through his boots, but it grew rapidly into a deep rumble that came from beneath the earth itself. Mine shaft, Owen shouted. One of the shafts is collapsing. The rumble intensified. Maddow looked toward town and saw dust rising from the area near Old Shaft 3. The ground was settling as the tunnels beneath gave way. The trestle began to tilt. The structure had been built over supposedly solid ground, but Mikhail's sabotage had undermined a much wider area. The far support post started sinking as earth beneath it crumbled. Snipe felt the shift and froze on the beam arms, windmilling. The journal slipped from his coat and fell tumbling toward the gully floor. No! Bessie screamed. She lunged across the framework, reaching out. Her fingertips caught the journal's cover just as it fell past, dragging it toward her. But the motion unbalanced her, and she started to slide. Owen's son threw a rope. Bessie caught it with a hand, holding the journal, wrapping it around her wrist. Owen and his son braced and took her weight as she swung beneath the trestle, dangling 20 feet above snow-covered rocks. The trestle groaned and tilted further. The far post sank another foot. Snipe lost his footing entirely and fell, hitting the beam hard before sliding and catching himself on a cross brace. He hung by one hand, legs kicking desperately. "Pull her up," Maddow shouted. Owen and his sons hauled on the rope. Bessie helped by walking her feet up the framework. Inch by inch, they brought her to safety. Maddow turned to Snipe, still hanging. The thin man was perhaps 30 feet away, 15 feet above the gully. "Help me," Snipe called, voice cracking. "Please, I am sorry, just help me." Maddow looked at the man who had tried to kill him twice, who had just stolen the evidence again. Every instinct said to leave him. But Maddow was not that kind of man. He holstered his revolver and began climbing the tilting trestle, moving carefully, testing each handhold. His club foot made it awkward, but he used upper body strength to compensate. Below, the rumbling continued, and the far post was sinking deeper. He reached Snipe just as the thin man's grip failed. Maddow grabbed Snipe's wrist with both hands. The sudden weight nearly pulled him off, but he wrapped his leg around a brace and held on. "I have you," Maddow gasped. "Climb." Snipe grabbed Maddow's arm and pulled himself up, scrambling for footholds. Together, they worked back toward the stable side. Owen reached down and hauled Snipe up the final few feet. Just as Maddow reached stable framework, the far support post gave way completely. The trestle collapsed with a screech of tearing wood crashing into the gully in a cloud of snow and dust. They stood on the edge, all breathing hard. Bessie held the journal clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Owen had Snipe by the collar, rifle pointed at his head. "Anyone else want to try taking that book?" Owen asked loudly. No one answered. But Maddow heard horses approaching. He looked toward the road to see Mikhail Volkov arriving with Dutch Merrick and Sheriff Kane, who had apparently escaped during the chaos. The three men rode hard, weapons drawn. "Into town," Maddow shouted. "Get to cover." They ran toward the buildings, but the collapse had drawn everyone outside. The street was full of people staring at the settling dust at the new crater where Shaft 3 had been. A woman screamed her house was sagging into the earth. Mikhail reined his horse to a stop in the chaos and raised his Spencer rifle. "Bessie," he shouted, "give me the book." People scattered. Bessie stood in the middle of the street, journal visible, facing her father across 50 yards. "No," she called back. "This ends now." "You do not understand what you are doing," Mikhail said. "That book ruins everything. My business, my reputation, everything I built." "You built nothing," Bessie shouted. "You stole and murdered and lied, and now everyone will know." Mikhail's face twisted. "I gave you everything. I taught you a profession, and this is how you repay me." "You destroyed yourself," Bessie said, voice breaking. "I loved you. I would have done anything for you. But you chose money over lives, over your own daughter." For a moment, Mikhail's face showed something like regret. Then it hardened. "If I cannot have the book," he said, "no one can." He swung the rifle toward Maddow. The message was clear: give me the book or he dies. Maddow pulled his revolver, 2 shots left, and aimed at Mikhail. At this range, the odds were poor, but he had to try. Before either could fire, the ground shook again. This second collapse was worse. The entire western edge of Rattler's End sat atop interconnected tunnels, all weakened by Mikhail's sabotage. Now they were failing in sequence like dominoes. The road beneath Mikhail's horse cracked and sagged. The animal reared in panic. Mikhail fought to control his mount. A shot went off the bullet, striking near Bessie's feet. She stumbled. Maddow caught her, pulling her toward the nearest building, the feed store with its stone foundation. Dutch and Kane were having similar trouble with their horses. Kane was thrown, landing hard. Dutch dismounted before his horse bolted. People were screaming, running as more ground collapsed. A water trough disappeared into a sinkhole. The general store's corner sagged, dropping 3 feet. Owen was shouting orders, trying to organize evacuation. Everyone to the eastern side, away from the old claims move. Chaos had taken hold. Families grabbed children, dogs barked, a few horses thundered past, eyes rolling. Maddo pulled Bessie into the feed store. Inside was dim, dusty smelling of grain and leather. The proprietor had fled. Maddo checked the back, finding a small office with a heavy desk and stone walls. "Here," he said, guiding her. "These walls should hold." But Bessie was staring out the window at the destruction, at buildings collapsing, at families running. Her face was pale, eyes wide with horror. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I documented which shafts were unstable. I told him where the weaknesses were. I did this." "You did not know," Maddo started. "It does not matter." Her voice rose. "I gave him the knowledge, those people out there losing their homes, that is on me." Maddo grabbed her shoulders, making her look at him. "Listen to me. Your father did this, not you. He chose to weaponize information meant to save lives. That choice is his. Understand?" Bessie's eyes filled with tears. "But I should have seen it. I am supposed to be intelligent." "You trusted him because he was your father," Maddo said gently. "Trust is not stupidity. It is human." She looked at him, and something crumbled. She leaned forward until her forehead rested against his chest and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. The journal fell from her hands. Maddo wrapped his arms around her carefully and let her cry. Outside, the world was falling apart. But in this moment, all that mattered was the woman in his arms. "I have you," he said quietly. "You are not alone." Bessie's arms came around his waist, holding him tightly. They stood like that as the rumbling faded, as screams became more organized, as the immediate crisis passed. When Bessie finally pulled back, her eyes were red, but clearer. She wiped her face and bent to retrieve the journal. "I am sorry," she said. "That was necessary." Maddo interrupted. "You are allowed to break sometimes." She almost smiled. "Even in the middle of disaster?" "Especially then." The moment hung between them, and then gunfire from outside shattered it. Dutch and Kane were approaching on foot, weapons drawn. Behind them, Mikhail had dismounted and was advancing with his Spencer. "They know we are here," Maddo said. Bessie tucked the journal back into her bodice. "Then we fight." They barricaded the door with grain sacks and furniture. The stone walls would stop most bullets, but windows were vulnerable. Maddo positioned himself to cover both entrance and side window. Bessie armed herself with a long metal grain scoop. "Bessie." Mikhail's voice came from outside. "Come out. We will talk. I promise no one will be hurt. Your promises are worthless. I am still your father. You stopped being my father when you decided I was worth less than profit." Pause. Then Mikhail coldly, "So be it. Dutch, Kane, take them. I want that book. Dead or alive does not matter anymore." Kane kicked the door. The barricade held. He kicked again, and wood began to crack. Dutch appeared at the window and fired through glass. The bullet whined past Maddo's head. Maddo returned fire, his second-to-last shot. It forced Dutch to duck. One shot left. The door burst open. Kane charged through pistol in his left hand, since his right was broken. But Bessie moved. She swung the grain scoop in a wide arc, catching Kane across the head with a hollow boom. He dropped instantly. Dutch came through the window in a crash of glass, rolling to his feet inside. He and Maddo faced each other, both armed, both ready. "Nothing personal?" Dutch said. "Just business." It is personal to me, Maddow replied. They fired simultaneously. Dutch's shot went wide. Maddow's last bullet took Dutch in the shoulder, spinning him and sending his pistol flying. Dutch fell to one knee, clutching his wound. Maddow's revolver clicked empty. He dropped it and drew his knife. But McHale appeared in the doorway, Spencer leveled. 7 rounds fully loaded. Drop it, McHale said flatly. Maddow hesitated, looking at Bessie. She gave a tiny shake of her head. Do not. But Maddow knew if he did not comply, McHale would shoot them both, and he would not let Bessie die. He dropped the knife. Smart, McHale said. He stepped over Kane's unconscious body. Now, Bessie, the book. No, Bessie said calmly. McHale swung the rifle toward her finger, moving to the trigger. I will count to 3. 1, shoot me, Bessie said steadily. But this journal is sewn into my corset now. You will have to strip my corpse to get it, in front of everyone, in the middle of town. How will you explain that? McHale's finger tightened. For a heartbeat, Maddow was certain he would do it. Then McHale lowered the rifle slightly. You think you have won, but you have no proof. That journal is just numbers without context. It proves nothing. Maybe not, Bessie agreed. She reached into her bodice, not for the journal, but for a folded paper. She held it up. But this will. It was a receipt. McHale's face went white. This is your signature, Bessie said. Your handwriting. Purchasing 40 pounds of blasting powder 2 days before the Shaft 3 collapse. The same shaft you told buyers was stable. The same shaft that killed 2 men. The same shaft that just destroyed half of Rattler's End. She held it higher. And this is not the only one. I found them all: powder purchases, bribe receipts, correspondence about disposing of problems. All in your handwriting. All signed by you. Enough to hang you 10 times over. McHale stared at the paper, horror dawning, as he understood his own meticulous record-keeping had destroyed him. Bessie, he said, voice almost pleading. I did it for us. For our future. The gold rush is over. I had to find another way to build something. You gave me nightmares. Bessie interrupted, voice breaking. You gave me blood on my hands. That is the life you gave me. The words struck McHale like blows. He staggered, looking old and broken. Then rage filled the void. Then you have left me no choice, he said, finger moving back to the trigger. If I am going to hang anyway, I have nothing to lose. Say goodbye to your protector. The rifle clicked empty. McHale stared at the weapon in confusion. He worked the lever. Nothing. He looked up to see Owen Daly in the doorway, holding the Spencer's tubular magazine in the buttstock 7 rounds, housed in the buttstock 7 rounds. Thought you might need this, Owen said, tossing it to Maddow. In that moment of confusion, Maddow surged forward, tackling McHale. They crashed into the wall. The empty Spencer flew from McHale's hands. They grappled brutally, trading vicious blows. McHale was larger, but soft from desk work. Maddow was younger, but his club foot made footing uncertain. McHale's fist connected with Maddow's jaw. Maddow drove his elbow into McHale's ribs. Something cracked. They rolled across the floor, scattering grain sacks. McHale grabbed a heavy iron grain scale and raised it overhead, bringing it down in a vicious arc at Maddow's head. Maddow twisted aside. The scale missed him and crashed through the floorboards with tremendous force, which revealed the real problem. The feed store's floor had been built over an old access tunnel. McHale's sabotage had weakened it. The scale's impact was the final stress. The floor began collapsing, not all at once, but in progressive failure, spreading like cracks. McHale fell through, first his scream cutting off as he dropped into darkness. The hole widened. Bessie was next, the floor disappearing beneath her. She fell, and Matto lunged his hand, shooting out to catch hers. He caught her wrist, and her weight nearly dragged him through. But he braced his feet against a joist, his club foot wedged between boards, and held on with every ounce of strength. Bessie dangled over black emptiness. Below, perhaps 15 feet down, Michael groaned. He had landed on broken timbers and rock. One leg was bent wrong, clearly broken. Blood stained his face. "Do not let go," Bessie gasped. "Never," Matto said through gritted teeth, every muscle screaming. But his injured shoulder was screaming. His fingers were slipping, sweat making his grip uncertain. Owen appeared and grabbed Matto's belt with both hands. Together, they began hauling Bessie up. She helped by scrambling with her feet. Inch by inch, they pulled her to safety. She got her splinted hand onto solid floor and pulled, scrambling away. The three tumbled backward just as the entire front section gave way completely. Walls buckling, roof collapsing with a massive groan. Below, they could hear Mikhail crying weakly. "Help me. Please, Bessie, I am your father. Help me." Bessie crawled to the crater's edge and looked down. Her father was visible below, leg twisted, blood pooling. "Papa," she whispered. "I am sorry." Mikhail called up, voice weak, blood on his lips. Internal injuries clearly severe. "I was wrong. I should have. I loved you. I always loved you. Please believe that." "I know," Bessie said, tears streaming. "I know you did, in your own terrible way." The tunnel groaned, more earth settling, cracks spreading across the ceiling. The area was unstable and growing more dangerous. Owen grabbed Bessie's arm. "We have to go. This whole section is coming down. We stay, we die." "We cannot leave him," Bessie protested weakly. "We do not have a choice," Owen said grimly. "I am sorry." Matto made the decision. He stood, wrapped his arms around Bessie from behind, and physically lifted her away from the edge. She fought him, screaming for her father, but Matto was stronger. He half carried, half dragged her toward the door and out. Behind them, the feed store made a final groaning sound. Walls folded inward. The roof caved. The entire structure collapsed into the tunnel in an avalanche of timber, stone, and dust. A cloud of debris billowed outward. When dust settled, the feed store was gone. In its place was a crater filled with wreckage. Somewhere beneath it, Mikhail Volkov lay buried. Bessie screamed a raw sound of grief and loss. She tried to run back to dig with bare hands, but Matto held her, wrapping his arms around her as she fought and sobbed. "Let me go. I have to help him." "He is gone, Bessie," Matto said gently but firmly, voice breaking. "He is gone. I am sorry, but he is gone." The fight drained from her. She collapsed against Matto's chest, body racked with sobs. He held her, one hand cradling her head, the other around her waist, and let her grieve. Around them, Rattler's End was chaos. Buildings had collapsed. People were injured, displaced, terrified. But the worst immediate danger had passed. The ground had settled. Remaining structures on bedrock stood firm. Dr. Pike appeared with his medical bag, beginning to triage injuries. Alma Finch was organizing shelter. Owen and his sons helped pull people from damaged buildings. The community was pulling together because there was no other choice. Sheriff Kane regained consciousness and was immediately taken into custody by miners whose families Mikhail had destroyed. They bound him and locked him in what remained of his own jail. Dutch Merrick sat against a wall with his wounded shoulder wrapped, defeated. And Snipe Kelly, Owen's son, found him an hour later, crushed beneath fallen timber from the feed store's collapse. The thin man had been standing too close when it came down, likely trying to see if there was anything left worth stealing. He had died instantly, a hen-not coward to the end, killed by his own greed and poor judgment. Hours later, when immediate crisis had passed and order was being restored, Matto and Bessie made their way to the hill east of town where ground was solid. The sun was setting, painting snow orange and gold. Behind them, Rattler's End looked war-struck buildings, collapsed streets, cratered lives upended. But it would survive. People would rebuild on stable ground, using Bessie's maps to identify safe locations. "What happens now?" Bessie asked quietly. "Now we make sure his crimes are documented," Matto said. "We take your evidence to the territorial judge in Deadwood. We testify. We see justice done. And after that?" Matto reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it to reveal a simple silver ring, old and worn smooth. "This was my mother's, the only thing I have left from her." He held it out. "In my culture, marriage does not always require big ceremonies. Sometimes it is just two people choosing to walk the same path, to build a life together." He met her eyes. "I cannot offer you wealth or status or comfort. I can offer you partnership, hard work, and whatever future we can build together one day at a time. If you want that." Bessie looked at the ring, at his face, at the life he offered. It was not what her father would have wanted. It was not what her mother had imagined. It would be harder, more uncertain, likely to face prejudice at every turn. It was also real and true and freely chosen. "Yes," she said clearly, taking the ring and sliding it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Yes, I will walk that path with you. Always." Matto's smile was radiant. He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and reverent and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were breathless and grinning. They sat together on the hill, hands clasped, making quiet plans. They would go to Deadwood and testify. They would return to help Rattler's End rebuild. They would establish a surveying business together, using Bessie's knowledge and Matto's understanding of land to help settlers work safely. They would face prejudice, but they would face it as partners. It was a good future, an earned future, a possible future built on foundations stronger than gold, built on trust and courage, and the kind of love that survives impossible odds. 3 days later, they left for Deadwood with Owen, Alma, and several miners as witnesses. The journey would take 2 days through mountain passes. The wagon was loaded with supplies, blankets, and the precious journal locked in a strong box. The first day passed without incident. They made camp that night at a relay station, a small log structure where freight wagons changed horses. The station keeper, a grizzled man named Harlan, welcomed them with hot coffee and warned that a storm was coming. "Should blow through by morning," Harlan said. "You can shelter here. Got room in the barn for the horses." They settled in, grateful for the warmth. Bessie sat close to Matto by the fire, their shoulders touching. Owen was cleaning his rifle. Alma was writing notes about the trial testimony. Around midnight, Bessie woke to the sound of horses outside. Many horses. She shook Matto awake. "Someone is coming." They roused the others. Owen moved to the window and peered out. Riders, at least 6. Could be innocent travelers, but... Or it could be Volkov's remaining associates. Alma said grimly. "Word has spread about what happened. If he had partners in the land fraud, they would want that journal destroyed." Harlan grabbed his shotgun. "Station is built solid. Stone walls. We can hold them off if we must." The riders stopped outside. A voice called, "We know you have evidence against Mikhail Volkov. Hand it over and we let you live." "Not Volkov's men," Owen muttered, "but men who were in business with him. The corruption ran deeper than we thought." Matto checked his revolver, reloaded now with powder and balls Owen had provided. 6 shots. "How many can you see?" 6 mounted, maybe more behind." The standoff stretched. Then someone threw a torch onto the station's roof. The dry wood caught quickly. "They are burning us out," Harlan shouted. Smoke began filtering down. They had minutes before the station became an oven. "The back door," Matto said. "We fight our way to the wagon. Owen, you drive. I will cover." "I am coming with you," Bessie said. "You are injured." "We are partners," she interrupted. "Together, remember." They burst out the back door into chaos. The riders were waiting. Gunfire erupted. Matto fired twice, dropping one rider and forcing another to cover. Owen's rifle boomed. Alma had a pistol and used it with surprising accuracy. They reached the wagon. Owen whipped the horses into a run. Bullets whined past. One struck the wagon's side, splintering wood. Matto returned fire, his shots measured and careful. The chase went into the snowy darkness. The wagon careened along the rough road. Riders pursued, firing sporadically. One got close. Bessie grabbed Harlan's shotgun from the wagon bed and fired both barrels. The rider fell. A narrow ravine loomed ahead. Owen guided the horses through at reckless speed. The wagon slid sideways, almost overturning, then righted itself. Behind them, one pursuing wagon was not so lucky. It tipped, spilling riders into the snow. By dawn, they had lost their pursuers. Exhausted, battered, but alive, they reached the outskirts of Deadwood. The trial itself took 3 days. Judge Augustus Winter was stern, but fair. Bessie testified, walking the court through the journal's contents with professional precision. Matto described finding her the siege, the collapses. Owen and the miners provided context about Rattler's End's suffering. The defense tried discrediting evidence, but the purchase receipts in McHale's handwriting were damning. The judge studied them with a magnifying glass, comparing signatures to Volkoff's known documents. Kane and Dutch were convicted, Kane of corruption and accessory to murder, Dutch of attempted murder and assault. Kane got 15 years in territorial prison. Dutch got 10. Both were led away in chains. Additional warrants were issued for McHale's business associates based on correspondence found in the journal. The territorial marshal began a wider investigation into land fraud. After the trial, Bessie and Matto returned to Rattler's End to find the rebuilding well underway. Structures were rising on the eastern side, all carefully sited using Bessie's maps. Dr. Pike had organized a committee to shore up dangerous areas. 1 week later, while Bessie was surveying a foundation site, she found something in the snow, near where the feed store had been. A metal strongbox, half buried, clearly thrown clear during the collapse. She called Matto over. Together, they pried it open. Inside was McHale's complete ledger. Not just fragments, but the entire accounting. Purchase orders, bribe receipts, correspondence with speculators across 3 territories, names of miners who had tried to investigate and been discouraged. It was a treasure trove extending far beyond Rattler's End. "This is bigger than we thought," Bessie breathed. He was working with dozens of others. This was not just one town. This was organized fraud on a massive scale. Matto looked at the ledger, then at his wife. "What do you want to do?" Bessie closed the book carefully. "We take it to Judge Winter. Let justice run its course, no matter where it leads. That will make enemies, powerful people who will not want this exposed." "I know." Bessie took his hand. "But we cannot stop now. If we turn away, we are no better than the men who profited from silence." Matto squeezed her hand. "Then we finish what we started." They delivered the ledger to Judge Winter that week. The investigation it sparked would take years and lead to arrests across multiple territories. It would expose a network of corruption in the mining industry and lead to reforms in land sales oversight. Through it all, Bessie and Matto worked side by side, surveying, testifying, building their business and their life. They faced prejudice and threats, but they also found allies and respect. Their partnership became proof that people from different worlds could not only coexist, but thrive together. Years later, their first child was born, a daughter with Bessie's dark hair and Matto's steady eyes. They named her Nadia after the grandmother she would never meet. And they told her the story of how her parents met, of courage and honesty triumphing over greed and fear. It was a good story, a true story, and it was only the beginning.